My entire world shattered when I observed the individual seated beside my son in that vehicle and overheard their clandestine discussion concerning me. My designation is Lydia, and I am 62 years of age. It was utterly inconceivable that I would unearth the most insidious and callous scheme concocted by my very own kin. The genesis of this saga occurred on that particular afternoon when I resolved to present Javier, my sole offspring, with an unexpected surprise. I had prepared his most cherished confection and intended to deliver it to his place of employment to uplift his spirits. Upon entering the parking facility, I noticed his silver sedan parked in a secluded bay. A playful notion sparked within me, eliciting a smile akin to that of a youthful child. My intention was to conceal myself in the rear seating area, thereby astonishing him upon his return. I stealthily entered the automobile, which was conveniently unlocked, and positioned myself behind the front seats. My heart throbbed with anticipation, envisioning his expression upon my sudden appearance with the chocolate cake he had adored since his formative years. I remained there, holding my breath, attuned to every sound emanating from the parking area. After a few moments that seemed to stretch into an eternity, I discerned approaching footsteps. The car doors opened and Javier took the driver's seat, followed shortly by another occupant in the passenger seat. It was a woman. Initially, I presumed she might be a colleague, until I recognized her voice as that of Raquel, his spouse. My immediate sentiment was one of affection. How thoughtful of them to decide to depart from work together. However, my smile dissipated as their dialogue commenced. Raquel's opening remarks struck me like piercing arrows to the heart. "Are you absolutely certain no one will suspect anything once it transpires?" she inquired in a frigid tone I had never before encountered. "Raquel, we have deliberated this countless times. The strategy is flawless. Mother will experience a highly natural, entirely plausible mishap. No one will question it when a woman of her years loses her footing on the stairs in her aged abode." Javier responded in a manner that sent shivers down my spine. The very air seemed to be extracted from my lungs. I struggled to process the words I was hearing. My son, my only son, the child I had raised single-handedly, following his father's demise when he was merely 8 years of age, was contemplating my demise. And following the funeral, once everything subsides, we can divest that venerable domicile and relocate to the residential development we have perpetually aspired to. With the $200,000 that property commands, augmented by her accumulated savings, we can subsist in the manner we have always envisioned. Raquel continued with a voice laced with perverse enthusiasm. My cognitive faculties became paralyzed. That abode, which she dismissively labeled as venerable, was the very sanctuary where I had relinquished everything to ensure Javier experienced the most fulfilling existence attainable. Each room held echoes of sleepless nights, tending to his illnesses, of birthdays celebrated with meager funds but abundant affection, of afternoons spent collaborating on homework at the kitchen table. "Alvin and Patricia are amenable, are they not?" Javier inquired. The utterance of those names caused my heart to fracture further. Alvin, my elder sibling, and Patricia, his spouse, were also ensnared in this diabolical conspiracy. "Naturally. Your uncle is in dire need of funds ever since he was discharged from his employment. And Patricia ceaselessly reminds me that your mother has invariably been rather parsimonious with them. She contends it is time for the family to receive that which they are rightfully due," Raquel replied with palpable disdain. "Parsimonious!" The word reverberated within my consciousness like a poignant lament. I had toiled as a domestic helper since the age of 18 to sustain my son. I had even relinquished my bridal accoutrements to fund his university education. I never indulged in acquiring a new garment so that he might possess all that he required. The life insurance proceeds will also be beneficial. That represents an additional $100,000 that we shall obtain without complication, Javier added. And in that precise instant I understood that the tender-hearted boy I had nurtured was no more. Tears began to stream down my cheeks silently as I remained in my concealed position, imploring them not to discover my presence. My physique trembled, not solely from apprehension, but from a sorrow so profound it felt as though I would splinter asunder. The discourse persisted for several additional minutes, meticulously detailing every facet of my orchestrated demise. They had accounted for every contingency, the precise timing, the method of simulating an accident, even their projected demeanor at the funeral to feign heartfelt grief. When they finally exited the vehicle and departed as if no untoward event had occurred, I waited an additional 10 minutes before daring to move. I emerged from that automobile a fundamentally transformed individual from the one who had entered. The doting, trusting maternal figure had perished in that rear compartment. With unsteady legs, I proceeded towards my own vehicle, acutely aware that I must now render a decision that would irrevocably alter the course of my existence. I drove homeward in a state of profound stupefaction, tears obscuring my vision and my heart fractured into myriad fragments. I found it impossible to reconcile the information I had absorbed. My own progeny, the very purpose of my being, harbored the desire to end my life for financial gain. However, to fully comprehend this profound betrayal, it is imperative to recount the trajectory that led us to this juncture. For my narrative with Javier commenced 35 years ago, upon his arrival into the world amidst abject destitution. His paternal progenitor, Robert, perished in a construction-related mishap when Javier was merely 8 years of age. He bequeathed to us no insurance, no financial reserves, nothing save for a modest, antiquated dwelling we had procured through considerable hardship. Abruptly, I found myself a single mother responsible for a child and possessing no formal education beyond the secondary level. I embarked on domestic employment at the tender age of 20. My days commenced at 5 in the morning. I prepared Javier's breakfast, escorted him to his educational institution, and then traversed the city, attending to offices, residences, and apartments, whatever was necessary to secure income. My extremities developed calluses from the potent cleaning agents. My vertebral column bore the strain of hefting weighty receptacles, yet I never uttered a complaint. Javier was an exceptionally bright child, consistently excelling academically. His instructors frequently apprised me of his prodigious potential, emphasizing the imperative of ensuring his pursuit of higher education. These pronouncements became the singular focus of my existence. Every monetary unit I acquired was meticulously allocated for his scholastic endeavors. When he attained the age of 15, he required a personal computer for his academic projects. While many mothers could readily procure such devices for their offspring, for me it represented the equivalent of 3 months of arduous labor. I disposed of my wedding band, the sole cherished memento of Robert, to procure that very computer. Javier remained unaware of the sacrifices I endured, and I deliberately withheld this information to prevent him from experiencing any sense of culpability. During his final year of secondary schooling, educational institutions offering legal studies began disseminating informational material. Javier had expressed a definitive aspiration to become a legal practitioner, and I was resolute in my determination to facilitate the realization of that ambition. The annual tuition fees amounted to $20,000, a sum that was astronomical for an individual of my financial standing. I consulted with my brother, Alvin, to solicit his assistance. He held a respectable position within an insurance firm and resided comfortably with Patricia. I elucidated the gravity of the situation to him, imploring him to lend me even a portion of the requisite funds, pledging to reimburse him with accrued interest. His rejoinder was both brutal and unequivocal. "Lydia, I cannot jeopardize my accumulated capital on your son's illusory aspirations. He ought to secure gainful employment and abandon such fanciful notions of attaining professional status." These pronouncements inflicted profound pain, yet they did not deter my resolve. I secured a second occupation cleaning a veterinary clinic during the nocturnal hours. My workday spanned from 5 in the morning until 11 at night, 7 days a week. My physical constitution was depleted, but my determination remained unyielding. Furthermore, I initiated the sale of homemade comestibles on weekends. I prepared tamales, empanadas, pastries, anything that could generate supplementary revenue. Javier occasionally rendered assistance, though I prioritized his academic pursuits. "Your sole responsibility is to study, my son. Entrust the remainder to me," I invariably advised him. Ultimately, I succeeded in accumulating the funds for his inaugural year of university education. The day I accompanied him for enrollment, I wept tears of sheer elation upon witnessing his name inscribed on the official documentation. My son was destined to become a legal professional. All my arduous endeavors had culminated in this moment. The collegiate years proved to be the most taxing of my existence. I labored for as many as 14 hours daily to maintain current tuition payments. There were instances where my personal funds were so depleted that sustenance was a challenge, yet I consistently ensured Javier possessed all his requisites: textbooks, stationery, funds for social engagements. I was determined he should not perceive himself as disparate from his peers who hailed from affluent backgrounds. During his 3rd year of studies, Javier commenced a romantic association with Raquel, a fellow student from an exceptionally prosperous family. Her father was the proprietor of multiple enterprises, and she was accustomed to a life of opulence that I could scarcely envision. Initially, I harbored concerns that Javier might experience a sense of inadequacy, but he appeared deeply enamored and content. Raquel maintained a cordial demeanor towards me, yet from our initial encounter, I detected an underlying coolness in her disposition. When she visited my abode, her gaze meticulously scrutinized her surroundings. The aged furnishings, the walls in need of cosmetic refurbishment, the modest kitchen where I prepared simple repasts. She never voiced her observations directly, but her non-verbal cues conveyed her judgment. Subsequent to his graduation, Javier secured a position at a distinguished legal establishment. His inaugural remuneration surpassed my earnings from 3 months of labor. I experienced pride, but also a sense of profound relief, envisioning the possibility of respite after years of relentless exertion. He wed Raquel in an opulent ceremony that depleted my entire financial reserves. She had adamantly insisted on nuptials befitting their societal standing, and although the expenditure left me financially depleted, my primary concern was my son's happiness. During the reception, I overheard some attendees making disparaging remarks about the groom's unpretentious mother with a discernible air of condescension, but I endeavored to disregard their comments. Following the matrimony, Javier's visits became increasingly infrequent. Raquel invariably offered pretexts, social obligations, professional excursions, familial gatherings with her parents. When they did deign to visit, their discourse invariably revolved around their newly acquired lifestyle, the lavish apartment they had leased, the expensive dining establishments they frequented, and their aspirations to acquire an even more substantial residence. I continued my professional pursuits, albeit now on a part-time basis. At the age of 60, my physical capacity could no longer sustain the arduous demands of my prior work schedule. I had managed to accrue approximately $50,000 over the years, funds I meticulously safeguarded for unforeseen contingencies or to assist Javier should the occasion arise. My relationship with my brother Alvin also deteriorated over time. After Javier's graduation and subsequent employment, Alvin began making sardonic allusions to the perceived good fortune of individuals with accomplished offspring. Patricia's pronouncements were even more cutting, persistently implying that I had acted selfishly by allocating substantial resources towards Javier's education, rather than extending aid to extended family members. What inflicted the deepest wound was observing the transformation unfolding in Javier. His principles, his vernacular, even his sartorial choices underwent a perceptible alteration. At times when he addressed me, I detected a patronizing undertone that lacerated my heart. It was as if he felt a sense of shame regarding his humble origins. 6 months prior, Javier and Raquel initiated discussions regarding the acquisition of a residence in an exclusive sector of the city. The properties in that locale commanded prices exceeding $500,000, a figure utterly beyond my comprehension. When I inquired about their financing strategy, his response was evasive, referencing investments and commercial prospects. I also noted an increasing frequency in discussions pertaining to financial matters during their visits. Subtle inquiries regarding the valuation of my property, the status of my savings, and the existence of any life insurance policies I held. At that juncture, I interpreted these as expressions of filial solicitude, an assurance that he was concerned for my financial well-being. Now, seated in my kitchen, having eavesdropped on that calamitous conversation within the automobile, all the disparate elements began to coalesce. The shifts in his character, the inquiries about monetary assets, Raquel's pervasive influence, the complicity of Alvin and Patricia, all had been integral components of a macabre scheme that had been in gestation for an extended period. My son, for whom I had consecrated my entire existence, harbored the intent to end my life for the purpose of inheriting my assets and appropriating my life insurance. The irony was profoundly cruel. The very wealth they intended to murder me for had been amassed with the singular objective of affording him the most advantageous life possible. Sleep eluded me for the entirety of that night. I lay in my bed, fixated on the ceiling, attempting to comprehend the magnitude of my revelation. My consciousness relentlessly replayed every utterance from that diabolical exchange. Repeatedly, I heard Raquel's glacial tone discussing my demise as if it were a commercial transaction, and the voice of my son, my own son, acquiescing to the particulars of my assassination. At the advent of dawn, I arose with a resolve I had not previously known. If their intention was to engage in duplicitous tactics, I was equally capable. However, my initial step was to fully comprehend the extent to which I had been reduced in their estimation. I resolved to undertake an action unprecedented in my life, to secretly observe my own family. Over the ensuing days, I commenced scrutinizing Javier and Raquel's habitual patterns of behavior. I positioned my vehicle discreetly in proximity to their residential complex in the mornings, trailed them from a considerable distance when they ventured out, and paid meticulous attention to every detail of their discourse when they visited me. The revelations that ensued were even more profoundly disturbing. Their mode of living was utterly unsustainable given their financial inflows. Javier commanded a respectable salary as a legal professional, approximately $6,000 per month, yet Raquel had ceased her professional activities subsequent to their nuptials, and their expenditures were exorbitant. They frequented dining establishments where the cost of a single meal approached or exceeded $200. Raquel acquired designer handbags valued in the thousands, and they had leased an apartment with a monthly rental exceeding $3,000. Furthermore, I discovered they had incurred substantial indebtedness. I inadvertently overheard a telephone conversation wherein Javier was engaged in a vehement dispute with an individual from a financial institution concerning overdue credit card payments. Their collective liabilities, encompassing loans and credit cards, surpassed $50,000, with accruing interest compounding at an alarming rate. The unrelenting financial strain had propelled them into a state of desperation, and I represented their sole avenue of escape. My domicile, appraised at $200,000, my life insurance policy amounting to $100,000, and my personal savings of $50,000, collectively constituted precisely the sum required to rectify their financial predicament and acquire their dream abode. However, the most crushing revelation was the discovery that my brother Alvin was not merely complicit, but had been the progenitor of this insidious proposition. One afternoon, while attending to domestic duties at the office where Patricia was employed, I inadvertently overheard a telephone conversation that rendered me breathless. Lydia has invariably been so avaricious with her financial resources, Patricia was articulating to someone on the telephone. Alvin is entirely justified. It is incumbent upon the family to claim that which they deem their due. That stingy elder woman will inevitably depart this life sooner or later. Why procrastinate? We too require those funds. Alvin incurred a job loss 3 months ago, and we have been unable to meet our mortgage obligations. I remained motionless behind her office door, paralyzed. My brother had experienced a loss of employment and had failed to confide in me. Rather than soliciting my assistance as a family member, he had elected a far more drastic recourse, my demise to secure the funds. That very evening I resolved to confront Alvin directly. I proceeded to his residence without prior announcement, an act entirely uncharacteristic of me, and rapped on the door, my heart pounding with alarming intensity. Upon his opening the portal, his countenance registered surprise, coupled with a fleeting expression that suggested guilt. "Lydia, what brings you here at such a late hour?" he inquired, omitting any invitation to enter. "Alvin, I must converse with you. May I enter?" I implored, striving to maintain a composed vocal cadence. We proceeded into the sitting room, where Patricia was engrossed in viewing televised programming. She offered a perfunctory greeting, maintaining her characteristic aloofness of recent years. I occupied a seat on the sofa and resolved to address the matter directly. "Alvin, is it factually accurate that you have been discharged from your employment?" I inquired, keenly observing his reaction. His complexion flushed crimson, and Patricia immediately deactivated the television. "How did you ascertain this information?" he demanded defensively. "The method of my discovery is inconsequential. What is paramount is that you are my brother and you withheld this critical information from me. Why did you not seek my assistance?" Alvin and Patricia exchanged glances that corroborated my most dire apprehensions. A silent communication transpired between them, indicative of a prearranged scenario. "Lydia, you have invariably navigated your own challenges. We were disinclined to burden you." Patricia responded with a disingenuous smile that failed to reach her eyes. "Patricia, I am his sister. Were Alvin to require assistance, I would readily provide it. I possess certain monetary reserves." At that precise juncture, I perceived a disturbing flicker in my brother's eyes. It was devoid of gratitude or relief, replaced by an unmistakable undercurrent of resentment. "Certain reserves?" he queried, his tone laced with sarcasm. "Lydia, we are all cognizant that your financial holdings far exceed mere certain reserves. You have been systematically accumulating wealth for years while the remainder of the family encountered hardships." His words struck me with the force of a physical blow. "Alvin, I amassed that wealth through a commitment of 14 hours of labor daily to ensure my son's education. I did not hoard it. I relinquished all for his sake. Precisely, Patricia interjected with venom in her voice. All for Javier. You never contemplated offering support to your own brother. When he required financial assistance for his university education, you denied him. However, for your esteemed Prince Javier, there was invariably ample funding. The dialogue escalated into overt hostility, and I could sense the palpable animosity permeating the room. It was as though years of suppressed resentment were surfacing with unrestrained intensity. You fail to comprehend, I attempted to explain. I earnestly desired for Javier to possess opportunities that we ourselves were denied. My aspiration was to disrupt the cycle of poverty that had perpetuated within our lineage. And what of disrupting the cycle of favoritism? Alvin bellowed, rising from his seat. What of considering your brother, who also requires support? It has perpetually been thus, Lydia. Since our childhood, you are the favored child of our parents, and now you conduct yourself as if you are superior to us. These accusations were demonstrably unfounded, yet I perceived that they had constructed a narrative to rationalize their deep-seated resentment. Within their distorted interpretation of events, I was portrayed as the selfish, privileged sibling, while they were relegated to the role of misunderstood victims. If you were so desperately in need of funds, why did you not approach me directly? I persisted, despite possessing an acute awareness of the underlying answer. Patricia emitted a mirthless peal of laughter. So that you could bestow meagre alms upon us as if we were supplicants? So that you could instill in us a sense of inferiority, as you invariably have? I have never endeavored to make you feel inferior. Oh, indeed, Alvin retorted with exasperation. And what of the time you purchased a residence while we remained tenants? And when Javier graduated from university and our children had barely completed their secondary education? And when you boast of your accumulated savings while we struggled to meet our basic needs? Each accusation was progressively more unjust than the last. I had toiled with the intensity of a slave to attain my current status. I had not inherited a single thing. Luck had not been a factor. I had literally sweated blood for every dollar. Yet to them, my relative success was perceived as a personal affront. Alvin, if you are in need of financial assistance, I can provide you with $10,000 immediately, I offered with palpable desperation, attempting to foster a peaceful resolution. $10,000? Patricia scoffed derisively. Lydia, we are acutely aware of the substantial extent of your financial assets. The residence is valued at $200,000. You possess $50,000 in savings, and your life insurance policy is for $100,000. And you propose $10,000 as if we were destitute. My blood ran cold upon hearing those precise figures. They possessed an inordinate amount of knowledge regarding my financial standing. Someone had been conducting an exhaustive investigation into my financial affairs. How are you privy to such detailed information about my assets? I inquired, my voice betraying a tremor. Alvin and Patricia fell into a disconcerting silence, but their unguarded expressions betrayed their complicity. I rose unsteadily from the sofa. I believe I have received my answer, I stated, moving towards the exit. Lydia, wait, Alvin called out from behind me. However, I was already departing the premises. That night, my suspicions were unequivocally confirmed. My own kin perceived me as an impediment, standing between them and the wealth they felt entitled to. This was not merely the machination of Javier and Raquel. It represented an extensive familial conspiracy that had been insidiously evolving over many months. The subsequent days constituted the bleakest period of my existence. I found myself ensnared in a predicament I could never have envisioned, cognizant of my own family's intention to perpetrate my murder, yet utterly devoid of recourse. To whom does one confide that their own child harbours the desire to extinguish their life? Who would extend credence to such an extraordinary claim? Moreover, I lacked any tangible evidence, merely an overheard conversation concealed within a vehicle. I concluded that I required more substantial proof before initiating any decisive action. If I were to confront them, I needed to be entirely fortified. I commenced meticulously documenting every facet of their behaviour, their patterns of conduct, their conversations, their visits, any detail that might serve as corroborating evidence. I also arrived at a decision that instilled considerable dread, yet I recognized its absolute necessity. I would permit them to believe their malevolent scheme was progressing according to plan. If I had acted in a manner that drew suspicion, or if I had directly challenged Javier, their entire approach could shift, making them significantly more perilous. Consequently, I opted to maintain the facade of an unsuspecting, trusting mother. 3 days following my exchange with Alvin, Javier extended an invitation to dinner. His voice on the telephone held an uncharacteristic warmth, which sent shivers down my spine, knowing his true sentiments toward me. Mother Raquel and I would like to take you to that Italian establishment you favor, he conveyed in a gentle tone. It feels like ages since we've had some quality family time. The establishment he specified was one we had visited only once, over a year prior, and it hadn't particularly impressed me. Nevertheless, I feigned delight. How thoughtful, dear. I adore the notion, I responded. Splendid. We'll collect you on Friday at 7. And Mother, please wear your favoured emerald gown. We want you to look resplendent. This particular mention of my attire struck me as odd, but I agreed without probing further. After our conversation concluded, I found myself pondering why he would specifically reference that particular dress. It was a garment I had purchased 2 years ago, one of the few costly pieces I had allowed myself in my lifetime. On Friday afternoon, I meticulously prepared myself. I donned the green dress as requested, styled my hair, and applied a touch of makeup. As I observed my reflection, I endeavoured to dismiss the persistent inner voice, whispering that this might well be my final repast. Javier and Raquel arrived precisely at 7 o'clock. Javier appeared ill at ease, though he attempted to conceal it with forced smiles and perfunctory remarks about the weather. Raquel, in stark contrast, seemed entirely composed, almost buoyant, which I found even more unsettling. En route to the restaurant, the dialogue was remarkably stilted. They discussed Javier's professional endeavours, hypothetical holiday plans, anything and everything except our familial connection. My responses were automatic, my focus entirely on scrutinizing their every action. At the restaurant, Raquel insisted I select the most extravagant item on the menu. Lydia, the bill is entirely on us this evening. Indulge in whatever your heart desires, without concern for the cost, she stated, her smile failing to reach her eyes. During the meal, they commenced posing seemingly innocuous inquiries about my health. How have you been feeling lately? Have you experienced any bouts of dizziness or difficulties ascending stairs? Have you recently renewed your health coverage? Mother, we are concerned about you residing alone in that substantial residence, Javier expressed, adopting a tone of solicitousness. The staircases are quite steep. What if you were to take a fall? Oh, my dear, please do not fret. I have resided in that house for 30 years. I am intimately familiar with every single step, I replied, striving for an air of nonchalance. But Mother, Raquel interjected, mishaps show no deference to the duration of our occupancy. Perhaps you ought to contemplate relocating to a single-story dwelling, something more secure for an individual of your age. The manner in which she uttered the word accident sent a tremor through me. It was as if she were testing its sonority, gauging its impact. And mother, Javier continued, have you given thought to drafting a will? I understand it is an uncomfortable subject, but it is imperative to have all affairs in order. There it was, the true impetus behind this dinner engagement. They wished to confirm the will was up to date before they extinguished my life. Well, I do possess a basic will, which I established a few years ago. I admitted a partial untruth. I am, of course, bequeathing everything to you both. I observed Javier and Raquel exchange a fleeting glance of satisfaction. It was a look that lasted barely an instant, yet it was sufficient to validate every suspicion I harbored. That is excellent news, Mother. However, perhaps you should review it with an attorney. Legislation evolves, and we wish to ensure your final wishes are executed precisely as you intend, Javier remarked in a professional cadence. Indeed, Raquel added. Javier could be of assistance with that. Given his legal profession, he could ensure its perfect accuracy. The irony was palpable. My son, who plotted my demise, desired to be the architect of the document that would benefit him posthumously. Following our meal, they insisted on escorting me back home. During the drive, the conversation grew increasingly ominous. They began discussing hypothetical scenarios. Mother, should something unfortunate befall you, Javier began, his voice tinged with feigned concern, is there anything specific you would wish for us to do with your personal effects? Why do you broach such somber topics? I inquired, simulating irritation. I fully intend to live for many years to come. Naturally, Mother, Raquel swiftly concurred. We simply desire to be prepared should the unexpected occur. It is the prudent course of action. Upon our arrival at my residence, an unusual event transpired. Instead of bidding farewell at the threshold as was their custom, they insisted on accompanying me inside. Allow us to assist you with the stairs, Mother. It is quite dim and you might stumble, Javier said, taking my arm. As we ascended the steps towards my entrance, I sensed their gazes scrutinizing each tread, each handrail, every potential point of vulnerability where an accident might occur. It was akin to them conducting a reconnaissance of a crime scene. Once inside, Raquel began to perambulate through the house as though conducting an inspection. Lydia, you truly ought to enhance the illumination on these stairs. They are exceedingly hazardous in the darkness. And Mother, Javier chimed in, this rug at the top of the steps is somewhat loose. You could easily trip over it. Each observation felt like another deep thrust into my heart. Not only were they orchestrating my murder, but they were present within my own home, meticulously calculating the precise methodology. After their departure, I remained awake throughout the entire night, trembling not solely from fear, but from a sorrow so profound it caused a physical ache. My son had been in my home, shared a meal with me, feigned concern for my welfare, all while contriving my death. That night I made the most agonizing decision of my life. I could not passively await the execution of their scheme. I could not continue to endure the perpetual dread of knowing each day might be my last. I had to take action, but it had to be in a manner they would never anticipate. If they desired me to meet with an accident, then an accident was precisely what they would receive. However, it would be an accident under my complete dominion. I commenced formulating the details of my own staged demise. Orchestrating my own supposed death was the most surreal and terrifying undertaking of my existence. For entire days I remained awake, contemplating every minute detail, every conceivable point of failure, every potential pitfall that could derail my plan. Yet, I understood it was the sole recourse to expose my family and preserve my own life. Initially, I required assistance, and there was but one individual globally whom I trusted implicitly, my neighbor, Beatrice. She was 70 years old, had dedicated her professional life to nursing, and we had cultivated a close friendship spanning over 2 decades. If anyone possessed the capability to aid me in this insurmountable endeavor, it was she. One morning, after ensuring I was unobserved, I proceeded to her residence, my heart pounding erratically. Upon opening the door, she immediately discerned my agitated state. "Lydia, what is amiss? You appear quite distressed," she remarked, ushering me inside. We settled in her kitchen, where we had shared countless cups of coffee over the years. However, this particular conversation was destined to diverge from all prior ones. "Beatrice, what I am about to disclose may sound utterly preposterous, but I implore you to listen with utmost attention," I began, my voice quivering. I recounted every detail, from the overheard conversation in the automobile to the sinister dinner, from my confrontation with my sibling to the peculiar visits to my abode. Beatrice listened in complete silence, but I witnessed her expression morph from astonishment to horror, and ultimately to righteous indignation. "Good heavens, Lydia, this is monstrous," she exclaimed, finally taking my hands within hers. "Beatrice, I require your help. I have devised a plan, but I cannot execute it in isolation." I elaborated on my concept. I intended to feign my own death in a manner so utterly convincing that even the emergency medical personnel would be convinced of my demise. "Lydia, do you comprehend the profound risks involved? If anything were to go awry, if I were to falter, I would genuinely perish," I interrupted her. "They have already set their machinations in motion. It is merely a matter of time." Beatrice closed her eyes, her brow furrowed in intense contemplation. "We would require specific pharmacological agents. We would need to meticulously calculate the precise dosages, and the timing would have to be impeccable." "So will you assist me?" She regarded me intently for several seconds, which felt like an eternity. "Yes," she finally affirmed, "but we shall proceed with the utmost caution and security." Over the ensuing days, Beatrice and I meticulously refined the details of our stratagem. She maintained connections within the medical institution where she had been employed for decades, and managed to discreetly procure the necessary pharmaceuticals. We also identified the emergency medical technician who would respond to the call, a young man named Reuben, who had recently graduated and lacked the extensive experience to detect a sophisticated ruse. The plan was intricate yet achievable. I would ingest a specific combination of medications designed to diminish my vital signs to virtually undetectable levels. Beatrice would be present to discover my supposed lifeless form and summon emergency services. Upon the paramedics' arrival, she would skillfully guide their assessment in a manner that would corroborate my death without prompting undue scrutiny. Once declared deceased, my body would be transported to the hospital mortuary, where a colleague of Beatrice's, a pathologist named Dr. Jones, not my brother, had agreed to assist without asking questions. He would falsify the death certificate, permitting my clandestine resurgence once the effects of the medications had dissipated. Concurrently, I would remain concealed within a secret chamber in Beatrice's basement, observing and documenting every action my family undertook subsequent to my supposed passing. The most formidable aspect of the plan involved legal and logistical considerations. We needed to ensure no autopsy would be performed, which necessitated my death appearing natural and attributable to my age. Beatrice proposed simulating a cardiac arrest, a common occurrence rarely subjected to extensive investigation in individuals of advanced age with no prior cardiac history. 2 weeks after we initiated planning, we deemed ourselves ready. We selected a Sunday afternoon, a time when we knew Javier and Raquel would be at her parents' abode for their customary weekly family luncheon. On Sunday morning, I awoke with a peculiar sense of serenity. After weeks of unrelenting terror, I was finally poised to assume command of the situation. I dressed with deliberate care in my favoured yellow gown, styled my hair, and even applied a subtle touch of makeup. If I were to depart this life, I wished to do so with dignity. Beatrice arrived at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, carrying a small medical satchel. "Are you absolutely certain about this, Lydia?" she inquired one final time. "Completely," I affirmed. I ingested the medications under her watchful supervision. The taste was acrid and unpleasant, but I resolutely suppressed any thoughts related to it. "How long until it takes effect?" I asked. "Between 15 and 20 minutes. You will initially experience drowsiness, followed by shallow respiration and a dramatic decrease in your pulse rate. It will be akin to entering a very light state of unconsciousness." The ensuing minutes constituted the longest of my existence. Beatrice diligently monitored my vital signs, meticulously recording every alteration in her notebook. Gradually, I began to experience a sensation of detachment, as though my consciousness were floating, disembodied. "Lydia, can you hear me?" Beatrice inquired. I yearned to respond, but my voice remained trapped within. I could hear her perfectly, yet I felt utterly immobilized. It was an experience both terrifying and strangely captivating. "Excellent. Your vital signs are precisely at the level required. Now I'm going to contact emergency services." I heard her dial the phone and commence what would be the most crucial performance of her life. "Please hurry, I have discovered my neighbor unconscious in her residence. I believe she has passed. She is not breathing and has no pulse. Please, be swift." While awaiting the paramedics' arrival, Beatrice carefully arranged my form on the living room floor, positioning my body in what would appear a natural posture for someone who had succumbed to a sudden cardiac event. "Everything will be all right, Lydia," she whispered into my ear. "In a few hours this ordeal will conclude, and we will possess all the necessary evidence." I detected the approaching sirens, and my heart, had I possessed any control over it, would have been pounding furiously. This was the moment of truth. If Beatrice's performance faltered, if the paramedics exhibited greater expertise than anticipated, or if any overlooked detail surfaced, the entire endeavor would unravel. The paramedics entered my home, their medical equipment at the ready, and from my semi-conscious state, I could discern fragments of their assessment. 62-year-old female, unresponsive. I detect no pulse. Respiration is imperceptible. How long has she been in this condition? "I found her just a few minutes ago," Beatrice replied, her voice choked with emotion, sounding genuinely distraught. "I came to visit, and the door was ajar. I discovered her in this state on the floor." After several minutes of evaluation, I heard the words I had both eagerly anticipated and profoundly dreaded. "I am so sorry, madam. Your friend has passed away. It was likely a heart attack. At her age, these events can be quite sudden." Officially, Lydia had ceased to exist. Now commenced the most arduous phase of the plan, observing my family's reaction to the news of my demise. I awoke in the basement of Beatrice's residence, profoundly disoriented, my mouth parched as if from a desert crossing. The medication's effects were gradually subsiding, but my body felt heavy and strangely alien. Beatrice was seated beside me, overseeing my recovery with the same professional dedication she had demonstrated throughout my simulated death. "How do you feel?" she inquired, assisting me in sitting up slowly. As if I were genuinely deceased, I managed to rasp, my voice hoarse. It was successful. They officially pronounced me dead without question. The death certificate is already issued. Officially, Lydia Monroe had expired yesterday at 3:45 in the afternoon from a sudden cardiac episode. The stark reality of our actions struck me with full force. I no longer held legal existence. I was a spectre, free to observe my family's comportment without their knowledge of my surveillance. "Did you inform Javier?" I inquired, though the question itself inflicted a pang of pain. Yes, I contacted him last evening after they transported you to the hospital. His reaction was quite telling. Beatrice presented her phone on which she had recorded the conversation. With trembling hands, I replayed the audio. Javier, this is Beatrice, your mother's neighbor. I have some exceedingly somber news. Your mother passed away this afternoon. A silence of several seconds ensued. When he finally spoke, his voice lacked any discernible surprise or devastation. It sounded instead like relief. "Oh my word, what transpired?" he inquired, but his tone of shock felt contrived. "A heart attack. I found her at her home. The paramedics indicated it was swift and painless." "I see. Thank you for informing me, Beatrice. Raquel and I will proceed to the hospital immediately to manage all necessary arrangements." "Javier, I am deeply sorry. I know how profoundly you cherished your mother." "Yes, it is. It is a devastating loss. But my mother had been experiencing some health issues recently. I suppose it was simply her time." That fabrication regarding my supposed health difficulties pierced me like a shard of ice. He was deliberately constructing a narrative to legitimize my demise before any uncomfortable questions could arise. After listening to the recording, I could no longer suppress my tears. The chilling detachment in his voice, the ease with which he accepted the news, the falsehood about my health, all of it unequivocally confirmed that they had indeed been plotting my demise. "There is more," Beatrice stated softly. "I discreetly installed surveillance cameras within your residence prior to your passing. I wished to capture their reactions when they came to collect your belongings." She directed me to her laptop, which provided real-time access to the cameras. On the screen, I observed my own living room, silent and devoid of life. It was an unsettling experience to view my home from this perspective, knowing it was no longer technically mine. "When do you anticipate they will arrive?" I asked. "Likely today. People generally do not delay in sifting through the possessions of the deceased, especially when financial gain is a factor." We did not have to wait long. Around midday, we heard the distinct sound of keys in the lock of my residence. Javier, Raquel, Alvin, and Patricia entered in unison, moving like a meticulously synchronized unit. What I witnessed next shattered my very soul. There were no tears, no outward signs of grief, not even a moment of respectful pause upon entering the dwelling where I had resided for 3 decades. They immediately commenced appraising my belongings as if they were evaluators at an auction. "Well, finally," Patricia remarked, her voice betraying palpable relief. I'd begun to doubt if this day would ever arrive. "Patricia, please," Javier interjected, though his tone conveyed more of a cautionary note than genuine disapproval. "We have just lost my mother." "Oh, Javier, spare me the sentimental pronouncements now. We all acknowledge this was an unavoidable necessity," Raquel stated with a frigidity that sent a chill down my spine. "Your mother lived her life. Now we shall commence living ours." Alvin was already meticulously examining the kitchen cabinets, his focus on locating vital documents. "Where do you believe she kept the financial instruments? We need to ascertain the details of her savings accounts." "Check the desk in her bedroom," Javier suggested. She was always exceptionally organized with such matters. I watched them descend upon my home like a flock of vultures, their hands touching my possessions, assessing their worth and strategizing the division of my inheritance. It was akin to witnessing my very existence being dismantled by individuals who were meant to cherish me. Raquel discovered my jewelry case and began to meticulously examine each piece. This gold chain might hold some value, and these earrings, though antiquated, could possess a certain sentimental significance for someone. "Sentimental value will not cover the mortgage," Patricia retorted sarcastically. "You would be better advised to concentrate on items of tangible worth." Javier located my financial documents within the desk drawer, precisely where I had always stored them. Here they are: savings account at Northwood Bank, $3,000, checking account, $8,000, and here is the life insurance policy. What is the policy amount? Alvin inquired eagerly. $100,000. The sole beneficiary is myself. Perfect, Raquel declared with evident satisfaction. With that sum, in addition to the savings and the proceeds from selling the house, we will have sufficient funds to acquire the new property and settle all our outstanding debts. And we will receive our agreed-upon share, will we not? Patricia inquired, her tone laced with an implicit threat. Naturally, Javier replied swiftly. As per our understanding, a quarter for you. Listening to my family negotiate the division of my inheritance while my body lay in the mortuary was an agony more profound than I could have ever imagined. Yet the most agonizing revelation was yet to come. Alvin discovered a family photograph on my nightstand, one of the rare images capturing us all together at Christmas 5 years prior. Instead of exhibiting any discernible emotion upon beholding it, he unceremoniously discarded it into the waste receptacle. We have no need to retain such sentimental artifacts, he stated with evident disdain. Alvin is correct, Raquel concurred. We must be pragmatic. We intend to liquidate the property swiftly, so we cannot burden ourselves with superfluous items. However, it was Patricia who uttered the words that inflicted the deepest wound. Frankly, I am astonished it took her this long to depart. Given her obstinate nature, I had anticipated she would persist until 90, purely out of spite. A wave of laughter erupted from them. They were laughing at me, at my death, at my supposed stubbornness for having lived so long. In that precise moment, any lingering doubt I may have harbored regarding the righteousness of my plan evaporated completely. Javier produced his mobile phone and commenced making calls. Morrison Real Estate Agency. This is Javier Ruiz. I require your immediate assessment of a property for expedited sale. Yes, the matter is urgent. The owner passed away yesterday. We wish to list it this week. They had not even contemplated a dignified funeral. When Raquel inquired about funeral arrangements, Javier responded, "A simple cremation, no viewing, no ceremony. It is more economical and considerably faster." "And what if individuals inquire as to why there was no wake?" Alvin queried. "We shall inform them that it was her final request, that she desired something understated and private," Javier replied without a moment's hesitation. They were even plundering my dignity in death. There would be no opportunity for my few cherished companions to bid me farewell. My life, a tapestry woven with selfless acts, would go unacknowledged. All that awaited me was a swift, nameless cremation. For 3 agonizing hours, they meticulously sifted through my residence, cataloguing every possession of value, orchestrating its eventual sale, and dividing my belongings as though they were spoils of conquest. Upon their departure, my home felt utterly desecrated. That evening, replaying the captured footage repeatedly, I solidified my resolve. Merely exposing their murderous scheme wasn't enough. They had to answer for every venomous word, every chilling moment of indifference, every fragment of my existence they had ravaged with their avarice. "Beatrice," I declared with unwavering conviction, "I require your assistance with the subsequent phase of our strategy." Her brow furrowed slightly as she inquired, "What precisely do you have in mind?" Yet her expression betrayed a premonition that it would be something of considerable magnitude. "I shall manifest from the spectral realm at the most mortifying juncture imaginable for each of them, and when I do, I will ensure the entire world comprehends the true depravity of their characters." My family believed my demise was their winning lottery ticket. They were utterly oblivious that the genuine jackpot was only just commencing, and they had gambled on the wrong number. The ensuing days were an emotional maelstrom, propelling me from profound indignation to a resolute determination I never knew I possessed. From my sanctuary in Beatrix's cellar, I continued to monitor my family's every action via the concealed surveillance equipment, meticulously documenting each callous exchange, each heartless decree concerning my supposed inheritance. Beatrice, with her innate meticulousness, honed by her nursing background, had strategically placed additional discreet cameras in Javier's study, Alvin's residence, even within Raquel's vehicle. This precision translated flawlessly into our clandestine operation. "Lydia, you must observe this," Beatrice instructed me on the third morning, gesturing towards her laptop screen. Javier was engaged in a phone conversation from his office. In the recording, I witnessed my son seated at his desk, a smile plastered on his face that sent a chill down my spine. "Yes, Mr. Davis, I understand the expedited process for life insurance payouts when the cause of death is deemed natural. Precisely, a cardiac arrest? No, an autopsy was not performed. The physician indicated it was entirely typical for an individual of her age, given her history of chronic stress. And the time frame for the disbursement? 1 week. Excellent." What affected me most profoundly was his utterly dispassionate tone. There was no hint of sorrow, not even the mildest semblance of distress one might expect from someone who had just lost a parent. He sounded precisely like a business professional finalizing a standard transaction. Immediately after concluding that call, he initiated another. "Raquel, it's me. Excellent news. The insurance settlement will be processed this week. $100,000 clean. Indeed, I've already contacted the real estate firm. They are scheduled to visit tomorrow to assess the property's valuation." "What?" "No, I haven't had the luxury of indulging in emotional reflection. We must remain pragmatic." That final declaration struck me like a physical blow. His mother had passed only 3 days prior, and he claimed to have no time for feelings. However, what truly fortified me for the ultimate phase of my plan was a conversation we intercepted that very afternoon between Raquel and Patricia at a downtown establishment. "You know what the most rewarding aspect of this entire affair is?" Raquel remarked, taking a sip of her latte. "That we have finally rid ourselves of that perpetual burden. Javier always carried guilt for not visiting her more frequently, for not providing her with more financial assistance. Now he can finally embrace his own life, unburdened by that constant pressure." "Oh, absolutely," Patricia concurred with palpable enthusiasm. "And the most ingenious part is that no one will ever harbor the slightest suspicion. It was Alvin's masterstroke of a plan, an elderly woman in her 60s succumbing to a heart attack. Who would dare question such a scenario?" "Precisely. And now we all emerge victorious. You and Javier can acquire your dream abode. Alvin can settle his outstanding debts, and I can finally cease this charade of affection for that perpetually embittered elder." Hearing Raquel refer to me as a bitter old woman after years of me treating her as if she were my own daughter was the ultimate indignity. In that precise moment, any lingering vestige of maternal or familial affection that might have persisted in my heart utterly evaporated. "Beatrice, I stated that evening, you possess connections within the media, do you not?" "A few. Why do you ask?" "Because I intend for my re-emergence to be a public spectacle. I do not wish for them to discover it privately and be afforded the opportunity to concoct excuses or manipulate the unfolding narrative. I desire the entire world to witness their true natures unequivocally." Beatrice offered a smile, the first she had displayed since this nightmarish ordeal commenced. "I have an acquaintance who is an investigative reporter at Channel 7 News, Maria Elena Vargas. She has a particular penchant for these sorts of sensational narratives." "Excellent. When can we arrange a meeting with her?" The following day, Maria Eleanor arrived at Beatrix's residence under the cloak of night, having taken stringent precautions to ensure she was not followed. She was a woman in her mid-40s, her eyes sharp with intelligence and an energy that is the hallmark of accomplished journalists. Mrs. Monroe, she addressed us after we had comprehensively detailed the entire situation. This is an absolutely astounding development. If you possess the evidence you claim, this has the potential to be the story of the year. We presented her with the audio and visual recordings we had meticulously compiled over the preceding days. I watched as she scribbled notes with fervent intensity while listening to my family's clandestine conversations, her professional skepticism gradually giving way to genuine indignation. "This is beyond comprehension," she murmured, after viewing the recording where Patricia alluded to their long-held anticipation of my demise. "And they are planning a formal gathering to divide the inheritance," I added. "Yes," I confirmed. "Javier once mentioned that whenever a family member passed, we would convene a formal assembly to read the will and distribute the assets. He described it as the civilized course of action." "When do you anticipate that meeting will take place?" she inquired. "Likely next Saturday. That is typically when the entire family is available." Maria Eleanor closed her notebook, her gaze locking directly with mine. "Mrs. Monroe, if we proceed with this, there is no turning back. Once this airs, your life and the lives of your family will be irrevocably altered." "They were already irrevocably altered the day they decided to extinguish my life for financial gain," I retorted without a moment's hesitation. "Now, I want the entire world to understand the true character of these individuals." Over the subsequent days, Maria Eleanor and her team meticulously prepared for what they aptly termed the most dramatic resurrection ever witnessed on local television. They installed additional surveillance equipment within my residence, coordinated with the police department to ensure officers were positioned for the apprehension of my family on charges of conspiracy, and even secured the presence of a judge to preside over the revelation. The strategy was elegantly simple, yet profoundly devastating. My family would convene at my home on Saturday afternoon for the official reading of my will. While they engaged in discussions regarding the division of my estate, I would make my entrance through the front door, accompanied by the television crew, law enforcement personnel, and all the incriminating evidence of their conspiracy. On Friday evening, Javier contacted all family members to confirm the impending gathering. "Tomorrow at 3 in the afternoon at Mum's residence," he informed each individual. "Ensure you bring identification, as the lawyer will require verification of the legal heirs." That fabricated pretext about a lawyer ignited a fresh wave of anger within me. There was no attorney involved. They had simply concocted that excuse to imbue the meeting with a semblance of legitimacy and formality. That night, sleep proved elusive, yet it was not nerves that plagued me, but rather an intense anticipation. After enduring days of profound pain, betrayal, and abject humiliation, I was finally on the precipice of achieving justice. More than justice, however, I was poised to attain something infinitely more satisfying: the unvarnished truth exposed for the entire world to witness. Saturday morning, I meticulously prepared myself. I donned the striking red dress I had acquired for Javier's wedding. I applied my makeup with the care one would reserve for a significant occasion and styled my hair to perfection. If I were to stage a resurrection, I intended to appear absolutely radiant. "Are you prepared for this?" Beatrice inquired as she conducted a final check of the recording apparatus. "I have been prepared since the moment I overheard my son plotting my demise," I responded with a composure that astonished even myself. "Today, they will discover that Lydia Monroe is not so easily dispatched." Maria Eleanor arrived with her camera crew at 2 in the afternoon. "The covert cameras indicate they are already arriving at your residence," she informed me. Your brother and sister-in-law have just arrived. Your son and daughter-in-law are presently parking. I observed on the monitors as my family members entered my home for what they believed would be their final occasion as beneficiaries. They were entirely unaware that within an hour, their lives would devolve into a public spectacle of humiliation from which they would never recover. Mrs. Monroe, Maria Eleanor stated, in mere moments you will walk through that doorway and confront those who conspired to end your life. Is there anything specific you wish to convey to them? A smile, the first in weeks, graced my lips. Oh, indeed, I have a great deal to express. At 3:15 in the afternoon, as I watched my family through the concealed cameras, settling into my own living room to orchestrate the division of my estate, I experienced a blend of trepidation and resolute determination I had never before encountered. It felt as though all the accumulated years of sacrifice, indignity, and suffering had converged into this single, decisive moment. On the monitors, I saw Javier occupying my favorite armchair, the very same one where I used to read him bedtime stories as a child. He held a folder filled with legal documents, his expression one of smug satisfaction that made my stomach churn. Raquel sat beside him, adorned in a new dress that had undoubtedly cost more than my entire year's clothing budget. Alvin and Patricia occupied the sofa, their eyes glinting with avarice as they awaited the precise figures of my inheritance. Patricia had even brought a notepad, meticulously jotting down numbers as if attending a high-stakes business meeting. Well, Javier began, his tone somber yet conspicuously false, we are gathered here today to discuss the distribution of my mother's assets. As you are all aware, she designated me as the sole heir in her testament. But as a family, we have reached an understanding to ensure a more equitable division, Raquel interjected, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. Maria Eleanor gently touched my shoulder. It is the opportune moment, Mrs. Monroe. They are discussing precisely what we anticipated. Taking a deep, steadying breath, I walked towards the entrance of my own house, accompanied by 2 camera operators, a sound technician, 2 police officers, and the relentlessly determined reporter. My heart pounded with such ferocity, I half expected the entire neighborhood to hear it. Are we recording? I inquired of the lead camera operator. Yes, ma'am, we are broadcasting live. Those words provided the final surge of courage I required. Thousands of individuals were about to bear witness to the most poetic form of justice they had ever encountered. I inserted my key into the lock and turned it slowly. The metallic click echoed through the house, instantly silencing the animated conversations in the living room. Did you hear that? Patricia's voice, laced with nervousness, asked. It must be the wind, Alvin replied, though his tone betrayed his unease. I pushed the door open and proceeded directly into the living room where my family was seated, engrossed in planning the profitable division of assets derived from my death. The television cameras followed me, capturing every fleeting second of what was poised to become the most dramatic revelation of their lives. As I stood in the doorway of the living room, the ensuing silence was absolute and chilling. Raquel was the first to lay eyes on me, her face drained of all color, and she emitted a shriek that likely reverberated through the surrounding streets. Oh my God, it cannot be! Javier sprang from the armchair with such haste that he sent the documents scattering across the floor. His eyes were so wide I feared they might erupt from their sockets. Mum, but you're deceased. Patricia began to sob hysterically, not from joy at my reappearance, but clearly from sheer terror. It's a phantom, it's a phantom. Lydia is dead. We all witnessed the death certificate. Alvin remained frozen as if transformed into a statue. His mouth hung open, but no sound emerged. Greetings, my dearest family. I stated, my voice as measured as I could possibly manage. I trust I am not interrupting anything of consequence. Maria Elena entered behind me, her camera crew in tow. Good afternoon. I am Maria Elena Vargas from Channel 7 News, and we are broadcasting live what may well be the most astonishing story of the year. What in blazes is happening here? Javier bellowed, finally regaining his voice, though it was tinged with hysteria. What is happening, my dear son? I replied, advancing deliberately to the center of the room. I have returned from beyond the grave to personally ascertain how you were orchestrating the division of my inheritance. But the hospital, the death certificate. You were cremated, Raquel stammered, visibly trembling. Ah, yes, the cremation. How fascinating that you mentioned that, Raquel, I remarked with a sense of vindication, especially considering you advocated for cremation without an inquest because it was more economical and expeditious. Is that not correct? The cameras perfectly captured the sheer horror dawning on her face as she realized I was privy to their exact words. Mrs. Monroe, Maria Eleanor interjected, could you enlighten our viewers as to what prompted you to orchestrate your own demise? I turned towards the cameras, acutely aware that thousands were observing this confrontation in real time. I was compelled to feign my death upon discovering that my own family had meticulously plotted my murder in order to claim my inheritance. That is an outright fabrication, Javier shouted, though his voice sounded more like desperate pleading than indignant rage. A fabrication? I questioned calmly. Do you perhaps refer to fabrications such as these? I produced my phone and played the recording of the conversation I had inadvertently overheard in his car. His and Raquel's voices filled the room, detailing the specifics of my orchestrated demise. Are you absolutely certain no one will harbor any suspicions when this occurs? The plan is flawless. My mother will experience a very natural, a very plausible accident. As the recording continued, I observed the color drain from my family's faces, transforming from shock to utter terror. Raquel began to weep uncontrollably, but these were not tears of remorse. They were tears of sheer panic as she grasped the magnitude of their exposure. That recording is fabricated, Patricia shrieked desperately. Someone has manipulated it. Lydia is deranged. Fabricated? I echoed, retrieving another phone. And what of this other conversation, Patricia? The one you had with Raquel at the cafe yesterday, wherein you proclaimed it was Alvin's perfect plan. I played the second recording, which featured Patricia openly discussing their long-standing anticipation of my demise, and how no one would ever suspect their involvement. Alvin finally spoke, his voice quivering. Lydia, this is a ghastly misunderstanding. We would never contemplate such a notion. A misunderstanding? I scoffed bitterly. Is it also a misunderstanding that you were all present in my home yesterday, dissecting my possessions like vultures? Is it a misunderstanding that Javier had already contacted the insurance firm to claim my life insurance policy? Maria Elena turned the microphone directly towards Javier. Mr. Ruiz, how do you account for these recordings in which you are clearly heard orchestrating your mother's death? Javier was visibly perspiring, his hands trembling uncontrollably. This is a conspiracy. Someone is attempting to dismantle our family. A conspiracy? I countered, much like the conspiracy you four concocted to end my life. Much like the conspiracy wherein you agreed to grant Alvin and Patricia a quarter of my inheritance in exchange for their complicity. At that precise moment, one of the attending police officers stepped forward. Javier Ruiz, Raquel Ali, Alvin Monroe, and Patricia Taylor, you are under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder. No, Raquel screamed. This cannot be happening. She is deceased. We saw her die. You did not witness my death, I replied, a sense of profound satisfaction washing over me. You witnessed my performance, and it appears I performed far more convincingly than you ever pretended to love me. As the officers proceeded to handcuff my family, Maria Eleanor continued with the live broadcast. Mrs. Monroe, how does it feel to confront those who conspired to take your life? It feels like justice, I responded, my gaze fixed directly on the cameras. For 35 years, I sacrificed everything for my son. I toiled 14 hours a day, liquidated my jewelry, relinquished my own aspirations to provide him with the education and opportunities he deserved. And this is how he repaid me, by plotting my demise for financial gain. Javier, his hands now bound behind his back, looked at me with a complex mixture of venom and despair. Mom, please, this is a terrible error. I love you. I have always loved you. You love me? I inquired, my voice cracking with emotion yet imbued with a newfound strength. Do you profess love for someone you planned to murder for $200,000? Do you love someone whose death you celebrate without even arranging a semblance of a dignified funeral? That's not true. Silence, I commanded, my voice resonating with a power I hadn't known I possessed. I will not endure another falsehood from your lips. I heard everything, Javier. I heard how you meticulously planned my accident. I heard how you reveled in my death. I heard Patricia express her surprise that it had taken me so long to expire. I heard you dividing my wealth before my very body had grown cold. Tears finally began to stream down my face, but they were not tears of sorrow. They were tears of profound liberation. Maria Eleanor, I addressed the reporter, turning to face her. I want this entire city to understand that family is not always defined by shared blood. True family comprises those who offer unconditional love, who support you during your most vulnerable moments, who genuinely mourn your passing rather than salivating over your inheritance. As the officers escorted my son, daughter-in-law, brother, and sister-in-law away, Javier shouted from the doorway, "This is far from over, Mum. We will contest this in court." "No, Javier," I replied, my voice resonating with a calm that surprised even me. "This concluded the moment you deemed your mother's worth less than monetary gain. Now you will confront the consequences of your actions." As the house finally settled into an unaccustomed silence, Maria Eleanor concluded the live broadcast. This has been one of the most remarkable narratives I have had the privilege to cover in my 2 decades of journalism. A mother who orchestrated her own demise to expose the very family that plotted her murder. Reporting live from the scene, Maria Elena Vargas, Channel 7 News. I sank back into my beloved armchair, the very same seat Javier had occupied just an hour prior, meticulously planning my financial future. For the first time in weeks, a profound sense of peace settled over me. Beatrice approached and sat beside me. "How are you feeling?" As if I have finally awakened from the most harrowing nightmare of my existence, I replied, and as though the true Lydia Monroe has just made her return from the grave. The months that followed my miraculous re-emergence felt akin to inhabiting an entirely new dimension. The story disseminated like wildfire within mere hours, its impact extending far beyond local boundaries. Media outlets across the nation featured what journalists universally acclaimed as the most perfect act of familial retribution in contemporary history. My telephone became incessantly active. Television producers clamored for opportunities to create documentaries. Writers vied for the rights to my life story. And a prominent Hollywood studio even extended an offer to produce a motion picture. However, the most significant outcome for me was that, after decades of silent sacrifice, My narrative was finally known to the entire world. Social media platforms erupted with an outpouring of supportive messages. Countless women shared their own deeply personal accounts of maternal devotion, of ungrateful offspring, of children who had abandoned them after receiving everything from them. Unintentionally, I had become the voice for all mothers who had dedicated their lives to their families, only to be met with profound betrayal in the end. The legal proceedings progressed with unexpected swiftness. The recordings, meticulously compiled by Beatrice and myself, served as irrefutable evidence of the conspiracy. Javier, Raquel, Alvin, and Patricia were formally indicted on charges, including conspiracy to commit first-degree murder, insurance fraud, and premeditated homicide for financial gain. Throughout the hearings, their legal counsel attempted to argue that the recordings had been obtained through illicit means. However, the judge definitively ruled that as the recordings were made within my own residence and documented my own conversations, no violation of privacy had occurred. Furthermore, the court acknowledged that the documented conspiracy to end my life justified any necessary measures taken to ensure my safety. What inflicted the deepest wound during the trial was witnessing Javier on the witness stand, attempting to rationalize his actions. The legal team representing me had constructed a defense that painted me as an overbearing, manipulative matriarch who had emotionally coerced her son throughout his existence. My alleged perpetrator felt ensnared by the incessant demands of a parent who was perpetually discontent. The defense attorney posited that Mrs. Monroe wielded her self-denial as a psychological weapon, making her son feel culpable for desiring his own independent life. To hear these falsehoods articulated in a courtroom shattered my spirit anew. They had twisted my unwavering affection and my personal sacrifices into something destructive and deceitful. Within their constructed narrative, I was cast as the antagonist, with them portraying themselves as victims of my supposed maternal despotism. However, when the opportunity arose for me to present my testimony, I finally had the chance to share my truth. With a voice that was both resolute and deeply moved, I recounted every concession, every sleepless night, every additional employment I had undertaken to provide Javier with the most advantageous life possible. I detailed how I had relinquished my wedding band to procure his initial computer, how I had toiled for 14 hours daily to finance his university education, and how I had set aside my own fulfillment to ensure his. Your Honor, I stated, my gaze fixed directly upon the judge, I never used my sacrifices as a means of coercion against my son. Quite the opposite, in fact. I endeavored to conceal my efforts from him so that he would not experience any sense of obligation. My sole aspiration was for him to be unburdened and free to forge his own path, to embrace happiness, and to establish his own household. The singular outcome I had never anticipated was that this very freedom would necessitate the orchestration of my demise. The most impactful juncture of the proceedings occurred when the prosecution presented the entirety of the recorded conversations that had been meticulously gathered. To hear those detached voices once more, discussing my orchestrated end within the confines of a crowded courtroom, was not only agonizing but also profoundly liberating. When the recording was played in which Patricia expressed her surprise at the extended duration it had taken for me to perish, I observed several members of the jury discreetly dabbing at their eyes. Upon the playback of the segment, where Raquel referred to me as that encumbrance they had finally managed to shed, even the judge required a moment to regain his composure. Javier succumbed to tears during this particular phase of the trial, though I remain uncertain whether these were manifestations of genuine remorse or merely the expression of apprehension concerning the repercussions he was confronting. The verdicts were rendered after a mere 3 hours of jury deliberation, guilty on all counts. Javier was subsequently sentenced to 20 years of incarceration. Raquel received a 15-year sentence, Alvin was assigned 12 years, and Patricia was given 10 years, recognized as the least actively involved in the planning but an indispensable accomplice in the scheme. As the judge pronounced the sentences, not one of them met my gaze. They kept their heads bowed, finally confronting the stark reality that their actions bore tangible and devastating consequences. Following the trial, I approached Javier one final time before he was escorted away. "My son," I said with a quiet softness, "I want you to understand that despite all that you have done, a part of me still cherishes the memory of the tender child you once were." He looked at me, his eyes brimming with tears. "Mom, I'm sorry. I'm so deeply sorry. I have no comprehension of what I have become. You have transformed into someone who valued monetary gain more than your own mother's life," I responded with a heavy heart. "However, perhaps these years spent within the confines of a prison will afford you the opportunity to recall the person you were before avarice consumed you." Those were the concluding remarks we exchanged. The subsequent months were dedicated to a complete rebuilding of my existence. I divested myself of the residence I had inhabited for 30 years. It held an overwhelming number of painful recollections, and I found myself incapable of continuing to reside in the very place where my family had plotted my demise. Utilizing the proceeds from the sale, I acquired a more modest yet beautiful dwelling in a tranquil neighborhood situated near Beatrice's abode. I also made a decision that fundamentally altered my perspective on wealth and finances. I contributed the majority of my savings to a philanthropic organization dedicated to assisting single mothers in funding their children's higher education. If my financial resources had been the catalyst for my family's desire to end my life, then I resolved to utilize those same resources for benevolent purposes worldwide. From the earnings derived from the rights to my narrative, I established a scholarship fund bearing my name. Each year, 5 working mothers are provided with complete financial assistance to facilitate their children's college enrollment. It is my chosen method of ensuring that my experience, however agonizing it may have been, contributes to a positive outcome. However, the most profound transformation in my life was the discovery of an unconventional family. Through the correspondence and messages I received after my story gained public attention, I encountered numerous individuals who had endured parallel adversities. Mothers betrayed by unappreciative offspring, siblings abandoned by avaricious relations, and elderly individuals exploited by their own kin. We coalesced into a sort of chosen family, a support collective that convened regularly to share our accounts, commemorate our triumphs, and reaffirm to one another that genuine affection exists even when its source is unexpected. One individual in particular emerged as exceptionally significant to me. Gabrielle, a 58-year-old woman whose daughter had deserted her in a nursing home after absconding with all of her savings. Gabrielle and I cultivated a friendship of such depth that she became the sister I had perpetually yearned for. "Do you realize the sheer irony of this entire situation?" Gabriel inquired one afternoon as we shared coffee in my new kitchen. "Our biological families betrayed us for financial gain, yet we discovered infinitely superior families devoid of any monetary influence." She spoke the absolute truth. My new life was replete with individuals who cherished me for my intrinsic being rather than for my material possessions. People who celebrated my accomplishments without calculating their potential personal benefits. Individuals who, upon my natural passing many years hence, would lament my absence rather than rejoice in my inheritance. 2 years subsequent to my staged demise, I received a missive from the correctional facility. It emanated from Javier. Across 4 handwritten pages, he offered an apology, utilizing language that, for the first time in years, conveyed sincerity. He detailed the therapeutic interventions he was undergoing in prison, His burgeoning understanding of the immense scope of his betrayal, and how he spent his nights reflecting upon the myriad sacrifices I had made on his behalf. "Mom," he penned on the final page, "I comprehend that I can never rectify my actions. I recognize that my presence here is deserved, and I acknowledge that you may never find it within yourself to extend forgiveness. Nevertheless, I implore you to know that with each passing day I spend within this cell, I recall the extraordinary woman who nurtured me, and I loathe myself for my profound obliviousness to your affection." I perused that letter numerous times over several weeks, engaged in internal debate regarding the advisability of a response. Ultimately, I elected to reply not to absolve him, but to definitively bring that particular chapter of my existence to a close. "Javier," I wrote, "I accept your apology as I perceive it to be genuine. However, forgiveness is a quality that you will need to earn over an extended period, potentially for the remainder of your life. The boy I raised is entombed beneath the man who orchestrated my demise, and only you possess the capacity to determine if he is worth exhuming." I never received a reply to that correspondence, and I have come to terms with that. Today, at 65 years of age, I can truthfully affirm that I am experiencing a level of happiness not attained in decades. My home resonates with the joyous sounds of my chosen family. My days are occupied with meaningful volunteer endeavors, and my nights are imbued with an authentic sense of tranquility. Occasionally, individuals inquire if I harbor any regrets about feigning my death. They question if a less dramatic approach to confronting my family might have yielded a more favorable outcome. My response remains invariably consistent. They elected to betray me in the most dramatic fashion possible by plotting my murder. I, in turn, simply chose to defend myself, utilizing their own methods. The paramount lesson I have gleaned from this entire ordeal is that true kinship is not defined by the shared biology we possess, but by the deliberate love we choose to bestow upon one another. My biological son betrayed me for financial gain, yet I discovered sisters, daughters, and even grandchildren among the individuals who entered my life following my resurrection. I also learned that it is never too late to embark upon a new beginning. At 62 years of age, when most individuals believe their lives have already been irrevocably shaped, I was presented with the opportunity for a complete rebirth. I did not merely simulate my death, I orchestrated my renaissance. And finally, I came to understand that justice sometimes manifests in the most unexpected of forms. It was not a judge or a jury that ultimately penalized my family for their treachery. Rather, it was the unvarnished truth, publicly exposed, that brought about their downfall. The very wealth for which they were prepared to end my life became the cost of the legal counsel that proved incapable of saving them. This evening, as I pen the concluding sentences of my account, I gaze out the window of my new residence at a garden I cultivated with my own hands. The blossoms I sowed are flourishing magnificently, nourished not by the acrimony of the past, but by the optimism of the future. My name is Lydia Monroe. I am 65 years old, and this is the chronicle of how I perished in order to truly live. Should any mother be perusing these words, feeling betrayed by the family she sacrificed everything to build, I wish for you to know that it is never too late to discover the affection you genuinely deserve. Because in the final analysis, true family is not that which bestows life upon us, but that which renders it worthwhile living. Did you find my story engaging? And from which city are you listening? Let us connect in the comments section. If you enjoyed the narrative, your support through a super thanks would be greatly appreciated, enabling me to continue sharing similar stories. Thank you profoundly for your heartfelt encouragement. I eagerly anticipate your thoughts on this story. On the screen, you will see 2 new life narratives that I highly recommend. My channel offers a wealth of additional content. Please remember to subscribe. I look forward to our next encounter in a future life story. With love and profound respect.